Isao Takahata gives Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind a failing grade of 30. Hayao Miyazaki, who was traumatized by the castle of Cagliostro, couldn't do it, and it was beyond belief. I can't do this, he's not human, I'm scared. You knew that, didn't you? I'm scared. At that moment, you cried woo 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 again. This is a story I have told many times before. Isao Takahata gives Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind a failing grade of 30. That's pretty bad. As a producer, I am very happy. But as a friend of Hayao Miyazaki, my own evaluation is 30 points. According to Isao Takahata, in terms of Hayao Miyazaki's ability, it scores 30 points. Of course, it was absolutely perfect in terms of turning the original story into a movie, but in terms of the expectation that Hayao Miyazaki will move on to a new point with this adaptation, it's a 30. I will talk about this. What Takahata-san could not tolerate was that the Valley of the Wind was not depicted and that the theme was God's salvation. I've written a little more about the reasons for this on page 151 of Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, volume 1 of the Ghibli textbook from Bungai Shunju. You're right, it does not illuminate the present day. What I mean is the Valley of the Winds, where the relationship between modern society and civilized society is unknown, founded on agriculture. I would say that it does not seem to be so. I am saying that they have not answered the question of how human beings should live beyond the end of the world, and that they are running away from the question. As we discussed last time, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind knows that another clean world is being created at the bottom of the Sea of Putrefaction, but he refuses to move to that world. You are no longer trying to take the people of the Valley of the Wind to the bottom of the Sea of Rot. Rather, he is saying that this Valley of the Wind, where people get sick and die quickly, is the world, the community we should protect. The value of the product is not depicted. Why should we live that long in the Valley of the Winds, where life expectancy is so short? Why not go to the bottom of the new Sea of Decay? The life of the people is not depicted in the film. Why? He said, because, quite frankly, he overdid the action. For example, for Isao Takahata, the idea of a battle with the Kyojin warriors is something he could have done, but didn't have to do. Instead, it should depict village life. For example, the film does not depict how the villagers cook and eat in the kitchen, how they sleep, or what the children's rooms are like. Is that even possible for a Hayao Miyazaki film? I was asked, and yes, it is. The reason I ask is that Isao Takahata's criticism is that I didn't depict anything about life in the Valley of the Wind, but we should use the scale for the daily life of that village. Right? We seem to have a daily life in the Valley of the Wind, but Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind doesn't depict it at all. Compared to other Miyazaki animations, there are almost no scenes of eating food, as can be seen from the fact that there are only bad, Chico nuts. However, Hayao Miyazaki, traumatized by the castle of Cagliostro, cannot slowly depict the daily life in the Valley of the Wind. Please recall, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind was such a bad box office movie that Hayao Miyazaki made Toho's animated film history. Cagliostro's castle is the first time that a truly animated film has ever had such a low audience. This is the next film after The Castle of Cagliostro, which was said by a Toho executive and resulted in Hayao Miyazaki being hung out to dry for many years afterwards. So we can't do such a scary thing. I hate to say it, but if I slowly depicted everyday life, I would be just like Horus. Horus, Prince of the Sun, which was made with Mr. Takahata, became the worst box office success in the history of Toei manga films because it depicted so much of everyday life. If we were to depict everyday life, it would take as much time as possible, and the film would exceed 3 hours in length. After one drawing of the kanji, it really turned out to be almost 3 hours. It's called the Tezuka Osamu Cultural Award 20th Anniversary MOOC. It's already heavy, so I don't have it with me now. There is a book titled Tezuka Osamu Cultural Prize 20th Anniversary MOOC Manga no DNA, Manga no Kami no Shintai wo Inheritors of the Will of the God of Manga, in which Toshio Suzuki gives his testimony. Hayao Miyazaki is actually a man who is very strict about deadlines. Even when I serialized Nausicaa, I was never late, and that was because of Takahata-san's influence. A person who meets deadlines under the influence of Mr. Takahata. This does not mean that Mr. Takahata keeps deadlines. Before we met, when we were young, the two of us created an animation called Horus, Prince of the Sun, which Mr. Takahata was supposed to complete in 1 year, but it took him 3 years. He said they extended it to 3 years. When he got into a big fight with the company and was told, "If you can't do it, we'll stop production." Mr. Miyazaki cried when he was told, "If you can't do it, we'll stop production." Toshio Suzuki said, "If I can't make another year's commitment over the next 3 years, I won't make this film." When he was told that production would be suspended, Hayao Miyazaki said, "We certainly worked hard and fought with the company, but we didn't do it to quit production. What have we come all this way for?" He cried. However, Isao Takahata, looking curiously at Hayao Miyazaki who was wailing, said, "I've made it this far, I'll definitely resume." Isao Takahata said, "We've made it this far, we're definitely going to resume." I said it with a nonchalant look on my face. At that time, Hayao Miyazaki thought, "What in the world is this person?" He was incredulous to the point of incredulity. At that time, he decided, if a job with a deadline comes my way in the future, I will make sure to meet it. He decided, if I get a job with a deadline in the future, I will definitely meet it. In pursuit of that quality, Isao Takahata continues to inconvenience many people. Hayao Miyazaki clearly stated at the time that he was scared. "I can't do this. This man is not human anymore. I'm scared." So, even now, Mr. Miyazaki can see that he will not make it. To meet deadlines, they cut down on scenes, even if they are spectacular. Even Nausicaa had a scene in which a parrot fights a giant god warrior in the storyboards. Later, when Hideaki Anno, who created Evangelion and then Shin Godzilla, was one of the staff members on Nausicaa, he said, he still wanted to draw the scene where the giant god warrior and the Ohm engage in physical combat. "It's so frustrating that I still talk about those days." Toshio Suzuki said, "Is this Hayao Miyazaki's feeling of shortening the film to the point of tears and cutting necessary scenes for the sake of the schedule? Isn't this a rational decision?" Isao Takahata cannot have the feeling to do such things without crying. "I already spent 8 years on Keigai, and if someone said that the production was halted because of that, I would think that it was inevitable that the production was halted, perhaps because I am lazy by nature." So, for Isao Takahata, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind is a film that, in order to keep the schedule and also to attract the audience's interest, he included action scenes, but cut down on the daily life. Unnecessary compromises were made, and the quality of the work was compromised. That's why it's 30 points. When Hayao Miyazaki heard this, though, he was so furious that he ripped off his romance album. I said to Toshio Suzuki at that time, "You knew 100 of those things, and Nausicaa was made, didn't you?" As a result, Horus, which Isao Takahata made, didn't get that many customers, but as a result, you made that compromise and made a film that Isao Takahata gave 30 points, and it became a big hit, didn't it? He said. That's when Hayao Miyazaki cried woo 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 again. "You must have been happy to have a client." I cried because he said, "You must have been so happy to get the customers, weren't you?" I cried, "You say that?" I cried. Well, I love these Hayao Miyazaki episodes.